In the far reaches of northern China, where the wind whistles sharply over jagged mountain ridges and the grasslands stretch out in endless waves, there stands a monument that defies nature's quiet rhythms. It is not merely a wall. It is a testament to fear, ambition, memory, and resilience. But the Great Wall of China did not begin as a single, unified structure. It was born from fragments, scattered pieces of effort stitched together by time, by struggle, by the stubborn will of those who built it. Long before it became a symbol recognized across the world, the wall was a whisper of earthworks and barricades, spread across warring territories. During the Warring States period, when China was not yet a unified empire but rather a land split into 7 major states: Qin, Zhao, Yan, Han, Wei, Shi, and Shu. Each state built its own defensive walls to ward off attacks from nomadic tribes that roamed the vast steppes to the north. These early walls were built not with pride or grandeur in mind, but with desperation, the fear of raids, of horses galloping through villages, of fires sweeping across the fields. This fear laid the first stone. The tribes of the northern steppes, including the fearsome Xiongnu, posed a constant threat. Skilled horsemen, moving quickly and unpredictably, they could appear at the borders with little warning, attacking, looting, and vanishing into the horizon. To protect their land, rulers of the northern states dug trenches, raised ramparts of packed earth, and placed lookouts on wooden towers. These were the early threads of the wall, disconnected and crude, but essential. Then came Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, ruthless, ambitious, and determined to leave a mark that would outlast time itself. He saw in these scattered defenses the possibility of a single, mighty wall, not merely to defend, but to assert, to carve into the land a symbol of his power and the newfound unity of the realm. Under his orders, the old walls of the former kingdoms were connected, reinforced, and expanded, stretching like a spine along the northern frontier. It was a task of unimaginable scale, and one that exacted a heavy price. For those who labored on the wall, the work was not noble. It was brutal. Hundreds of thousands of peasants, prisoners, and soldiers found themselves driven into the mountains and deserts, ordered to build through the scorching heat of summer and the freezing winds of winter. With crude tools, bare hands, and backs bowed under the weight of stone and timber, they hauled materials across harsh landscapes. There were no machines to lift the heavy blocks, no advanced methods to ease the suffering. The wall rose slowly, painfully, through the efforts of men whose names history has mostly forgotten. Many of them never returned. Illness, exhaustion, and accidents were constant. In some places, it is said the dead were buried within the wall itself, their bones entombed alongside the bricks they laid. Whether true or myth, the sentiment remains. A monument built not just with stone, but with lives. The Chinese would later say the wall was the longest cemetery on earth. It is a phrase that clings to the wind when you walk the lonely ridges today. The Qin dynasty fell, as all dynasties do, but the idea of the wall endured. During the Han dynasty, the wall was extended even further, becoming a military lifeline that protected the famous Silk Road, allowing caravans of traders to pass from China to the Middle East and Europe with relative safety. Watchtowers dotted the skyline, and beacon fires were used to send signals across vast distances in minutes. The wall had evolved, not just a barrier, but a living system of surveillance, communication, and control. Yet even so, it was never impenetrable. Raiders found ways around, through, or beneath. In some periods, the wall fell into neglect, abandoned by rulers who had other priorities. It was under the Ming dynasty, many centuries later, that the wall took on its most iconic form. Facing new and more organized threats from the north, the Ming emperors rebuilt the wall using bricks, stone, and mortar. What had once been a dirt embankment now became towering battlements with strongholds, stairways, and parapets. But still, the price remained the same. It was the common people, farmers torn from their fields, laborers taken from their homes, who bore the weight of this massive undertaking. In village after village, families were left waiting, hoping, or mourning. The wall may have protected their nation, but it also took from them without mercy. In stories passed down through generations, it is not the emperors who are remembered, but the workers who vanished into the mist. Their fate sealed along the spine of stone they helped create. Today, the Great Wall is celebrated, admired, walked upon by millions. But when the tourists go home, and the sun sets behind the distant hills, the wall is quiet again. The wind returns to its old songs, brushing across the ancient stones like a sigh. It is then that the stories resurface, not of victory, but of endurance, of hands that bled, of feet that ached, of hearts that longed for the homes they left behind. The Great Wall is many things: a boundary, a marvel, a grave, but perhaps above all, it is a memory carved into the earth, a silent witness to centuries of effort, sacrifice, and the deep, unspoken will to survive. As the seasons shifted across the northern plains, the Great Wall too seemed to breathe with the rhythm of time. Snow would settle thick upon its stones in winter, muffling even the sound of wind, while in summer the sun beat down, baking the bricks to a quiet warmth. Yet through every change in weather, the wall remained, an ever-present shadow stretched across the landscape, as much a part of the land as the mountains themselves. While many imagine the wall as a single, unbroken line, in truth, it is a series of many walls, built over centuries by different dynasties, each shaped by the fears and ambitions of its time. The paths twist and turn, rising with mountain ridges and dipping into valleys, spanning deserts and grasslands, and reaching out toward the edge of empires. Some sections run parallel, others branch away, and still others vanish altogether, consumed by time, erosion, or the hand of man. In the Ming dynasty, which reigned from the 14th to the 17th century, the Great Wall was more than a defense. It was a statement of intent, with their capital in Beijing and a rising threat from the Mongol tribes to the north. The Ming emperors understood that their wall could not be merely symbolic. It had to work, so they invested in fortifications on an unprecedented scale, building with stone and fired bricks, using lime mortar and granite. Watchtowers were placed at regular intervals, garrison towns built behind key passes, and fortresses set up to serve as the spine of the frontier. Every section was carefully considered: the height of the wall, the width of the walkway, the placement of the battlements, even the sloping sides. All were designed to resist not only invaders but the test of centuries. Materials were hauled from great distances, sometimes by animals, sometimes by men tied together with ropes, trudging up steep ridges with heavy loads upon their backs. Stones were cut by hand, each piece shaped to fit snugly with the next, creating a structure that could endure earthquakes, floods, and time itself. Yet even in this grand phase of construction, the toll on human life remained constant. Those who built the wall were often conscripted from the poorest parts of the empire. They arrived in remote work camps after long marches, thin, frightened, uncertain of what lay ahead. Many were not builders or soldiers, but farmers, teachers, and merchants who had never held a hammer. Still, they were given tools, ordered to dig, and expected to work from sunrise until darkness swallowed the hills. Food was scarce. Water had to be carried from distant wells. Illness spread quickly in the cramped shelters where laborers slept shoulder to shoulder. When someone collapsed from fever or exhaustion, their body was sometimes wrapped in cloth and buried in the shadow of the very wall they had helped build. Families were rarely notified. Letters sent home were often intercepted or lost. And so mothers waited without word. Wives stared at empty doorways. And children grew up hearing stories about fathers who had gone to the wall and never returned. Despite this, life found moments of softness even in such places. Workers shared stories by firelight, spoke of faraway homes, and carved small figures or poems into the stones they handled. Some etched their names onto bricks as if to say, "I was here, I mattered." A few of these markings still remain, hidden in the joints and cracks, visible only to those who look closely enough. At certain watchtowers, soldiers stood guard through long nights, staring into the darkness for any sign of movement. When the sky was clear, stars glittered overhead in silence, and the outline of the wall stretched into the distance like a silver ribbon. Guards took turns resting, wrapped in fur-lined cloaks, listening for the faintest clink of hooves or rustle of wind-blown grass. If a threat appeared, a movement in the dark, a shadow in the hills, they would light a signal fire. That fire would be seen by the next tower, and the next, until the message had traveled hundreds of miles in a matter of minutes. It was not just a defense but a nervous system, a network of eyes and flames and footsteps, reacting to the rhythms of war and peace. In calmer times, the wall became a border for merchants and migrants. Gates were opened under strict supervision, and caravans passed through, carrying silk, porcelain, tea, and precious metals. On the other side, horses, furs, and spices arrived in return. These exchanges were watched with suspicion but also with interest, for trade brought wealth, and wealth brought stability. Yet peace never lasted. From time to time, raiders found gaps in the wall, bribed guards, or simply overwhelmed the defenses with swift, coordinated attacks. They would vanish as quickly as they came, leaving behind villages burned, soldiers killed, and fear renewed. In response, the emperors ordered further expansions, more towers, more soldiers, higher walls. But the wall was never meant to be an impenetrable shield. It was a deterrent, a delay, a way to slow down the inevitable. Those who defended it knew this. They did not expect perfect safety, only more time to prepare, to respond, to survive. As decades passed, legends began to grow. Stories were whispered about ghosts of workers who haunted certain sections, appearing on moonlit nights to walk the battlements in silence. Locals spoke of strange lights that flickered where no fires should be, and of footsteps heard when no one was near. Whether true or imagined, such tales gave the wall an aura of mystery, a soul shaped not by architecture but by memory. In one popular tale, a woman named Meng Zhang traveled thousands of miles to find her husband, who had been conscripted to work on the wall and never returned. She searched from village to village, asking for news, until she finally reached the section where he had died. Overcome with grief, she wept at the foot of the wall for days, and the story says that her cries were so powerful they caused a section of the wall to collapse, revealing the bones of her beloved. The emperor, hearing of this, was moved by her devotion and gave her a proper burial for her husband. Today, a statue of Meng Zhongnu stands at Shanhaiguan, gazing out toward the wall with unending sorrow. Such stories survive because they speak not only of bricks and battlements but of the people who lived in the shadow of the wall. The real history of the Great Wall is not written in textbooks alone. It is also carried in songs, in stories passed down by families, in the quiet places where memory clings to stone. The wall, in the end, is not just a thing to see, it is a thing to feel. It holds centuries of silence, of sacrifice, of dreams lost and kept. And as you drift deeper into that silence, it waits, timeless and still, listening with the patience of mountains. The Great Wall is often imagined as a line between two worlds, dividing the civilized empire from the unknown wilderness beyond. But in truth, that boundary was never so simple. On one side were towns, farms, roads, and officials who represented the order of dynastic rule. On the other side lived the nomadic tribes, people of the open steppe, whose ways did not fit the structure of walls and cities but who were no less rich in culture, strength, and history. The wall stood between these worlds not only as a defense but as a mirror. Where it rose in stone and brick, it reflected the anxieties of an empire that feared what it could not control. And yet, at the same time, it represented a longing, a desire to hold onto what was known, to protect the rhythms of daily life from the unpredictable winds of invasion. At certain passes along the wall, like Jiayugan in the west and Shanhaiguan in the east, gates opened to allow exchange. These passes were not merely military checkpoints. They were places of contact. Here, traders met with soldiers, scholars met with travelers, and messages passed between cultures. A camel caravan might stop for rest, its animals breathing clouds into the cold morning air. A musician from the north might play a haunting tune, his notes drifting over the walls and into the valleys below. A monk might pause to pray, his words soft against the roar of history. Life at these gateways was complex. Markets sprung up, offering goods from far and wide. Silk and tea moved westward, while exotic spices, ivory, and jade flowed in. With trade came stories, ideas, and even marriages. Over time, the wall became not just a division but a thread, pulling together distant peoples under a canopy of stars and stone. Still, there were tensions. The soldiers who manned the wall often lived far from their homes, stationed for years at lonely outposts with only the wind and their comrades for company. Their meals were simple, made from millet or rice, sometimes salted meat or vegetables if the supply wagons arrived on time. During the long winters, they wrapped themselves in layers of wool and fur, watching the horizon for any flicker of movement. They trained daily, marched along the parapets, maintained their weapons, and sharpened their blades on stones worn smooth by generations of hands. For many, the wall became not just their duty but their world. Children were born in garrison towns, grew up hearing the call of watchmen and the clang of blacksmiths. Some dreamed of leaving, of going south to the warmer cities where life moved to a different rhythm. Others stayed, becoming part of the cycle, their lives linked to the stones beneath their feet. There were times when quiet descended, and the wall felt almost forgotten. During these lulls, farmers planted crops near its base, letting the shadow of the battlements fall across their fields. Sheep grazed beside broken towers. Monks passed through with baskets of herbs and chants on their lips. Birds built nests in the cracks of the watchtowers, and wildflowers sprouted between the bricks. The wall became part of the land, less a symbol of power and more a reminder of endurance. But the quiet never lasted forever. Political shifts in the capital often led to unrest. A new emperor might rise with different views on the tribes beyond the wall. Sometimes alliances were formed through treaties and gifts, and other times conflict returned with sudden violence. The wall had to be ready for both. Inside its towers, maps were updated, and scouts were sent out to gather news. Horses were saddled, their hooves striking sparks from the stones. Banners were mended, swords cleaned, arrows counted. When night fell, the towers lit their signal fires, not in warning, but in practice, a glowing chain that linked distant outposts in silent communication. There were also engineers and builders who traveled from section to section, inspecting damage, planning repairs, designing improvements. They studied the effects of rain on certain slopes, the wear of wind on different kinds of brick. Their records were kept in small, careful books, tied shut with cloth and sealed against the weather. These men were not warriors, but their knowledge was essential. Without their work, the wall would crumble, not from battle, but from time. Sometimes, during long nights, stories would pass from one guard to another. Tales of spirits that walked the wall after midnight, of beasts that roamed the forests beyond, of ancient kings whose bones still slept beneath the stones. These legends blurred the line between truth and memory, yet brought comfort to those who listened. They made the wall feel alive, something more than rock and mortar, something that watched and remembered. In the far west, at Jiayuguan, travelers often paused before entering the Gobi Desert. There, the wall meets the sands, and the landscape shifts from stone to endless waves of dust and wind. To stand at Jiayuguan was to feel the edge of the empire. Beyond lay vast emptiness, where the stars fell closer to the earth and silence stretched into eternity. The wall ended, but the sky continued. A poem was once carved into a gate at Jiayuguan. It read, "Hear the wild wind sighs. Stone meets sky, and men pass on, but the wall remains." It was not written by an emperor or general, but by an unknown scribe, perhaps a clerk or scholar whose name was lost. Yet those lines capture something essential, that even as centuries passed, and rulers changed, the wall stood quietly, bearing witness. The Great Wall is often described in terms of height and length, of bricks used and miles covered. But those measures miss something deeper. They do not speak of the child who watched his father disappear beyond the mountain road. They do not tell of the girl who ran her fingers along the cracks in the stone, whispering names she could no longer remember. They do not hold the silence that settles just before dawn, when even the wind forgets to move. As sleep edges closer and thoughts begin to drift, imagine standing on the wall as the first light of morning touches the eastern sky. The air is cold but still. Below, the land stretches out in every direction, vast and quiet. The wall curves away, disappearing into mist and memory. And for a moment, it feels as though time itself has stopped, waiting, listening, and breathing with you. Time moves slowly on the Great Wall, not in minutes or hours, but in centuries. When you walk its length, each step carries the weight of countless lives, soldiers, laborers, emperors, merchants, and travelers who passed through long before you and whose footsteps were swallowed by wind and dust. There is a sense that the wall remembers everything, even the things forgotten by books and kings. Some of the most haunting remnants of its story are not found in the battlements or watchtowers, but in the quiet spaces in between, places where the stone crumbles, where the path narrows, where nature has slowly begun to reclaim what was built with such labor and sacrifice. In these forgotten stretches, grasses grow tall around the base of ancient walls. Moss creeps across the brick. Trees sprout from old foundations, their roots pushing gently through the mortar, as if nature were tapping on the shoulder of history, reminding it that nothing remains untouched forever. Birds circle overhead, their cries echoing across empty valleys, and insects buzz softly in the shadows of what once were barracks and armories. These ruins are not maintained or visited often. No tour groups arrive, no guide explains what happened there. Yet something in the silence speaks louder than words ever could. It tells of time's patience, of how all things, no matter how mighty, will someday return to stillness. One such section lies in the hills of Hebei province, far from the polished walkways and restored stone near Beijing. Here, villagers still tell stories of the wall, passed down from their grandparents and great-grandparents. They say the wall once shook with the sound of drums and the thunder of hooves. Now, only the wind moves, carrying the scent of pine and earth. One elder, now nearly blind, sits beneath an old fig tree near the base of the wall and speaks of the time when her father, as a young man, helped carry stone for a local repair crew. She recalls how he would come home with cracked fingers, dust in his hair, and speak little, but how his eyes would drift toward the hills at dusk, watching the wall turn gold in the evening light. He said the wall never needed words. It simply was. In another village, a temple rests quietly beside a section of the wall so worn it looks more like a rocky ridge than a man-made structure. The monks there chant softly each morning, offering prayers not only for peace but for memory, that the wall's story, and the people who lived by it, will not be lost. Further west, near Gansu, the wall transforms again, no longer built of brick. This stretch was made from layers of tamped earth, hardened over time into walls that rise like cliffs from the desert floor. Here, sand and wind are the true rulers. They wear down everything slowly, without malice or haste. Travelers in this region describe a kind of deep quiet, the kind that settles in the chest and lingers long after one has left. You feel small here, not in fear, but in recognition of the vastness around you and the effort it once took to tame it. Local herders pass by on horseback, their silhouettes sharp against the sunset. They carry with them generations of memory, and when asked about the wall, they often shrug, as if it has always been there. To them, it is not a marvel or mystery. It is simply part of the world, like the sky or the steppe. Some families have stories about ancestors who once lived inside the wall, in narrow rooms carved into the towers. In winter, they would light fires of dried brush, warm themselves with tea and dried berries, and tell stories passed from voice to voice. They spoke of a time when wolves howled beyond the hills, and of how a single lantern lit in a tower could bring comfort for miles. They also spoke of strange moments, of hearing voices on the wind, of shadows that did not move with the sun, of distant music where no one played. Whether these tales were true or shaped by long winters and imagination doesn't seem to matter. What matters is that they were shared and remembered. On certain cold mornings, mist rolls over the wall like a tide, covering everything in silver. The stone becomes slick, and the path vanishes a few feet ahead. In such moments, it is easy to imagine yourself walking not just across the land, but through time, as if with every step, the world behind you fades, and the world ahead remains unknown. There are no signs, no directions, only the feeling that the wall continues, always forward, always watching. The Great Wall does not demand admiration. It simply endures. Unlike the palaces of emperors or the temples of gods, it was not built to dazzle with beauty or to echo with ceremony. It was built to hold back danger, to hold together a people, to hold the line between presence and absence. And in doing so, it became more than stone. It became an echo of all who came before. Their voices may be gone, but the air still remembers them. The stones still hold their warmth. The wind still carries their breath. So as you rest, let your thoughts drift along the worn path of the wall. Let the rhythm of its stones slow your heart. Let its silence ease your mind. For in this long, gentle place where history stretches beyond sight, sleep arrives not as an end, but as a continuation, like the wall itself, always there, always waiting. There are seasons along the wall, not just of weather, but of sound, color, and memory. Spring brings a soft greening to the hills, when the grasses return and tiny flowers bloom between the stones. The air smells of soil and rain, and birds nest again in the crevices of ancient towers. In summer, the heat settles over the brick and earth, and the wall becomes almost too hot to touch at noon. But the sky is vast and blue, and shadows move lazily across the battlements like old friends returning home. Autumn is perhaps the most poetic time. The trees near the forested sections turn gold and red, and the wind carries a dry, crisp whisper. This is when the wall feels closest to the breath of history. When you can almost see the outline of a soldier passing through the mist, or hear the soft rhythm of a faraway drum. Winter comes last and longest. The snow arrives without announcement, covering everything in white, hiding the cracks and the broken stones, softening even the sharpest memories. In the coldest months, the wall feels deserted, but not lonely. It is a kind of solitude that brings clarity, not sadness. You stand upon it and feel the hush of centuries pressing gently against your shoulders. You realize that everything you've been told about history, the battles, the rulers, the changing tides, can be found here in silence, in stone, and in stillness. The soldiers who once stood guard through these seasons lived lives of discipline and repetition. Each day began before the sun, with the sound of bells or a shouted order. They checked their weapons, cleaned their posts, walked the perimeter. Meals were taken quickly, often just porridge or flatbread with pickled vegetables. Some days were uneventful, others brought smoke on the horizon. A rider galloping toward the gate, a horn echoing through the hills. Not all who lived along the wall were warriors. There were also wives, children, and elders. In some stretches, the garrisons turned into communities. Small gardens were planted in sheltered corners. Chickens clucked behind rough fences. In the evenings, after the patrols were done, music could be heard, a simple flute or the low thrum of a drum made from stretched leather. Someone might sing an old folk song, one passed down from a distant village hundreds of miles away. Letters were sent and received, sometimes by messenger, sometimes hidden in the folds of trade wagons. These letters spoke not of war or duty, but of things missed and loved. A mother's soup, a brother's wedding, a tree that bloomed early this year. The wall was far from home for many, but through these notes, threads of connection remained unbroken. At certain places along the wall, travelers carved names into the stone, not grand messages or proclamations, just initials, or the name of a village, or a date. These marks remain, barely visible now, softened by time and wind. They were not made to last forever, but in making them, someone hoped not to be forgotten. The emperors who ordered the construction of the wall knew it would take more than a generation. Some were told it could never be finished. Still, they pressed forward, not just out of fear of enemies, but from a desire to shape the land, to declare that they had been here, that their rule mattered. They summoned engineers, strategists, builders, and tens of thousands of laborers. Some came willingly, others were sent as punishment. They carried stones on their backs, mixed mud with straw, laid bricks by hand, and hammered foundations into the mountains. Many of these workers never saw their homes again. Some perished from exhaustion or illness. Others were buried near the wall, marked by little more than a mound of earth or a carved rock. The wall is not only a monument to defense, but a memorial to labor, to human hands that built something far beyond their lifetimes. Legends grew from this sacrifice. One tells of a young woman whose husband was taken to work on the wall and never returned. She walked for months to find him, and when she arrived, the news of his death broke her heart. Her tears, they say, caused a section of the wall to collapse, revealing the place where he had been buried. This story, though shaped by myth, carries something deeper, a recognition of how grief lingers even in stone. As dynasties change, each ruler made their own additions to the wall. Some strengthened old sections, others abandoned them. One emperor chose to build a secondary wall behind the first, unsure if one would be enough. Another believed diplomacy was stronger than brick and sent gifts instead of soldiers. The wall grew and shrank, expanded and rested, according to the hopes and fears of those in power. But the wall was more than a tool of the state. It became part of the imagination. Poets wrote of it, not always with pride, but with wonder. They described it as a dragon sleeping across the mountains, as a line of sorrow cutting the land, as a ribbon binding earth to sky. In some verses, the wall was a lover, distant and unreachable. In others, it was a ghost, whispering stories no one could fully understand. Even today, these poems survive. Their words are carved on stones, tucked into books, or recited by those who remember them. They speak not only of what the wall was, but what it meant. A barrier, yes, a shield, but also a symbol of longing, for peace, for home, for a moment when danger might finally pass. As you rest now, picture the wall under the stars. No footsteps, no voices, just the quiet hum of the earth. Somewhere far off, a fox moves through the grass. A breeze stirs the edge of a tattered flag. And the wall, vast and patient, remains. Sleep gently with it. Let your breath follow the slow rhythm of its stones. Let your dreams carry you along its winding path, past towers and fields, through seasons and silence, for the night is long, and the wall is still watching. When the Great Wall curves across the northern landscapes, it does not merely touch the mountains and valleys. It becomes part of them. In some places, it disappears entirely into the cliffs, as if the stone surrendered itself to the rock. In others, it stretches boldly across the open hills, each section whispering to the next in long, quiet syllables that only the wind and time can fully understand. In this part of the journey, the wall enters the vastness of Inner Mongolia, where the steppe opens wide and endless, and where the land rolls gently like ocean swells frozen in soil. The wall here is different again, built from layers of packed earth, reinforced with reeds and sand. It feels more fragile, more human. It does not rise sharply against the sky like its brick counterparts in the east. Instead, it humbles itself, running low and worn, like the back of an ancient creature that has walked too long. Herders still roam this land, much like their ancestors did when the wall was young. They guide their animals along trails that have existed for centuries, pausing by wells dug long ago, resting beneath lone trees that have witnessed countless seasons. Their stories are not written in books but told quietly, beside fires under the stars. They speak of the wall not as something foreign, but familiar. It has always been there, like a distant cousin who never speaks but always watches. In this region, the wind never stops. It moves low across the grasslands, lifting dust and memory in equal measure. On some days, the wall seems to dissolve into the horizon, as if swallowed by the very sky it tried to divide. And yet, when you draw near, you see it still stands. Worn, yes, but steady. The shape of it may have softened, but its presence remains strong. Centuries ago, patrols in this area rode horses bred for endurance and speed. They carried bows strung tight with sinew, arrows bound in leather quivers, and wore wool cloaks to keep out the wind's bite. They traveled in small groups, moving from tower to tower, lighting fires when they spotted movement, or signaling with mirrors when the sun was high. These watchtowers dotted the wall like punctuation marks in a sentence too long to read in one breath. Some were built high, commanding views for miles. Others were small, almost hidden, nestled among hills or half buried by drifting sand. Each had a purpose. Each held moments no one remembers but that still linger like the smell of old smoke. The soldiers who occupied these towers had a life both simple and hard. They kept records in small wooden books, wrote reports with brushes and ink, recorded sightings of animals and strangers alike. They measured days by the stars and listened to the howls of wolves at night. When supplies were low, they relied on wild onions, dried meat, and the kindness of nearby villagers. They wrote letters home with slow hands, ink freezing in the cold. They spoke to one another about dreams, about distant cities, about whether their names would be remembered. Often, they weren't, but their presence shaped the land, just as the wall itself did. Together, stone and silence built a kind of immortality. Over time, these towers became nests for owls, homes for snakes, hiding places for memories. In one tower, long abandoned, travelers found a half-buried flute. It had no name carved into it, only a pattern of waves and wind. No one knows who made it or who last played it, but when the wind moves just right, the air sings through its hollow body, and for a moment, it feels like someone is still there. Further west still, the wall merges with older fortifications, blending into defenses that existed even before Imperial China. Some were built by smaller kingdoms, long vanished. Others were formed naturally by cliffs and rivers, later reinforced with walls and towers. This part of the wall tells a different story, not one of unity, but of layers. Kingdoms built over kingdoms, stones laid upon forgotten stones. Archaeologists here tread carefully, brushing away sand with small tools, revealing fragments of pottery, old arrowheads, iron hinges from doors that once opened and closed with the rising sun. They measure and map, not to glorify war, but to understand how people lived and endured. And then, there is the desert. The great Gobi begins to stretch its fingers toward the wall. Here, the wind carves everything, stone, earth, memory, into soft curves. The wall no longer stands tall, but becomes a line in the sand, a suggestion of something greater beneath. Travelers crossing this stretch must walk carefully, following dry riverbeds and broken markers. In the distance, mirages shimmer. The wall appears, then disappears, then returns again. At night, the desert sky becomes a black canvas filled with stars. The Milky Way rises overhead, and the wall beneath it seems small, almost delicate. But this contrast is part of its strength. The wall was never meant to rival the heavens. It was meant to stand here, on the edge between chaos and calm, saying gently to the world, "We were here." So as you close your eyes now, imagine walking along this western edge. Feel the hush of sand beneath your feet, the cool wind brushing your skin, the stars above guiding your steps. Let your thoughts drift with the breeze, past dunes and towers, past silence and memory. You are not walking alone. You are accompanied by thousands of years of footsteps, gently echoing beside your own. Sleep now, held by the vastness of the land and the long, patient story of the wall. It does not hurry, neither should you. Now, as we reach the final stretch of this quiet journey, the Great Wall begins to feel more like a whisper than a wall. Its shape fades in places, overtaken by time and terrain, yet the idea of it remains as firm as the mountains it clings to. Travelers who come to see it today may walk only a few steps, but in those steps, they carry centuries. In some sections, the bricks have fallen into quiet heaps, slowly becoming one with the soil again. Grasses grow where battlements once stood. Trees stretch their roots between cracks, gently pulling apart what once was solid. There's no rush in this decay. The wall accepts its place in time, not as something broken, but as something becoming part of the earth once more. Children run along some of the restored paths, their laughter echoing down the stone corridors. They don't speak of emperors or invasions. They play. They stop to drink water and rest in the shade of watchtowers, unaware of how many lives have passed through the very same spaces. Perhaps it is better that way. The wall is no longer a barrier to fear, but a place to explore. Elders sit on nearby benches, gazing out across the hills, remembering stories they heard from their own grandparents. Some speak aloud, pointing to distant towers, saying things like, "That one stood even in the heavy snows," or, "My uncle once worked on that path during repairs." Their words float out into the open air, soft and unhurried, joining the thousands of voices the wall has held over time. And still, poets come. They walk the wall slowly, stopping often, not to photograph, but to feel. They place their hands on the bricks, close their eyes, and listen, not to the past exactly, but to the space between past and present. They write not of conquest, but of the way the light moves over the stones at dusk, of the silence between two birds calling across the valley, of how the wall is less about keeping things out, and more about holding time in place for a little while longer. In the capital, A section of the wall is brightly restored. Tourists shuffle through, guided by loudspeakers and schedules. But far away, beyond the cities and crowds, the quieter pieces wait. They ask nothing of you. No tickets, no souvenirs, only your patience. And if you give them that, they offer a peace that's hard to name. It is in these hidden corners that the spirit of the wall lives on. Not in its size, but in its stillness. Not in its history books, but in the breath between stones. It is where an old couple walks hand in hand, not speaking, just walking. It is where a shepherd watches his goats nibble grass at its edge. It is where the wind brushes across the stones with the same gentleness it has known for 1,000 years. And maybe, that's what history really is. Not the loud battles or the grand declarations, but the quiet endurance, the parts that stay after everything else has changed. So if you ever find yourself on that long path of the wall, whether in your thoughts or in your dreams, walk slowly, feel the stones beneath your feet, look up to where the sky meets the mountains, breathe deeply, and know that even here, in silence, you are part of something immense, something beautiful, something ancient. The wall does not ask you to remember every date, every name, every ruler. It only asks you to be still for a moment, to listen, and to carry that stillness with you as you go. And now, as the night deepens and your thoughts begin to float, let them drift like mist over the mountains. Let your breath settle into the rhythm of stone and wind. Let sleep take you gently, like a traveler resting after a long road. Thank you for joining this quiet journey through the tales of the Great Wall. If this story brought you calm, or helped you rest, consider subscribing for more gentle histories to fall asleep to. Your support lets us continue exploring the soft corners of the past. Together, until next time, sleep well, and dream deeply.